get started in just a sec, and I'll add these guys, spotlight them in a minute. So thank you for joining. So I think, lots of familiar faces. So hopefully, and I know a lot of you have been on the BD Matters calls in the past, but for those who don't know, BD Matters is a community of very talented business developers, but also welcome to salespeople, marketing people, growth marketers. And we offer sort of content workshops, meetups, and events. So these sessions, these interviews happen on the first Wednesday of every month at 12 o'clock. So thanks all for being here. If you're a paying member, you will get a recording of this. And today we're going to be discussing how to hire and nurture BD talent, which is a really important topic. So I am very thankful to be joined by Ali Wallace, who I will add to the spotlight now. He is the founder and CEO of DNA Recruit. I am also joined by Bianca McLeish. McLeish, is that right? Yeah, got it right.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. Who is not McLeish? I've turned you into something else. A global content director at Publicis Groupe. And Rebecca, let me find you. Rebecca Crook, who's Chief Growth Officer EMEA at, is it CI&T?
Yes, it's an unusual one, but yes.
Mouthful. Right, guys, do you want to do a quick
off the tongue.
intro? Do you want to go around, do quick intros of yourselves? I'll start with you, Ali, and then we'll...
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Ali Wallace from DNA Recruit. I'm the founder and CEO. Not only do I oversee and run the business, but I'm very, very much hands-on in sort of finding and recruiting the best talent in the industry. We cover all areas of sort of agencies and businesses, but sort of growth and business development, however you'd like to call it, sales is a big part of what we do. It's what I love doing. I'm a BD person myself. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Ali. Rebecca, want to go next?
Right, hi everybody. Yeah, so I'm Rebecca Crook. I'm Chief Growth Officer at CI&T, which is a digital global product agency. We're about 6,500 people. So I'm responsible for growing and scaling the business. My background is in new business and marketing. I started about 25 years ago in integrated brand agencies and then moved across into digital about 15 years or so ago. So as I said, lead kind of the sales, business development, marketing, PR, all of that for us globally. Outside of work, I am a non-exec director for a couple of organisations and a trustee with a number of charities. And I'm also involved in some industry initiatives. So I'm co-chair of the EMEA Growth Council as well, and mentor some people through Global Women in Technology.
Fantastic. Good to
Nailed
have you.
that, Rebecca.
Yeah. No, she's done that before, right? Jesus. Bianca, no pressure.
I know, how am I going to top that? So I'm Bianca McLeish. I work for Publicis Groupe as a global content director in the global business development team. Outside of work, I'm actually an international DJ. I literally just came back from New York earlier this week, which was pretty fun. I had a few gigs there. And I'm also a radio host. But yeah, I've got like 10 years worth of, 11 years actually, business development experience. I worked previously for like an experiential production agency prior, then spent some time at Havas before coming to the Publicis family. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Right, you did.
Bianca, DJ, that's much cooler.
And now I'll put all the business development questions and just ask about that.
Yeah. I'm pretty dull, really, on the. I didn't go into my personal side, so apologies.
No worries. Well, yeah. Look, if any of you guys listening in want to comment in the chat or ask any questions throughout, just do jump in and let us know. It's a very discursive environment. So yeah, I think should we start with you, Rebecca? I wanted to ask, what do you love about business development? Which I know can be a pain in the arse sometimes, but let's stick to the positive.
I think for me, there's two key things actually. The variety. I love the variety, the fact that one day you can be pitching for an airline, the next day it might be dog food. Like I love that variety that you get, and also the variety in terms of you get to interact with so many different people from across the business as well. I think, I don't know, maybe Bianca might have a different view, but I think that new business people get bored quite quickly. So having that variety is pretty key. And it's one of the things that helps drive me. So I don't get bored. So I'm always constantly motivated. So variety for me is the key.
Yeah. What do you guys want to add? Bianca, is there something?
Yeah.
To it?
Yeah, variety was actually going to be the same thing as me. I'd say variety and spontaneity. Because as most BD people will tell you, like no day is the same. There's always a new brief that's different that landed last week versus this week. There's always like a new challenge or something new that the clients ask for. And yeah, as Rebecca said, we do get bored very quickly. So I think just having that variety and spontaneity of just new things coming up that you have to pivot to quite quickly is something that I love. Because whenever I speak to someone on a client team and ask them like, what did you do today? It's like the same thing over and over and over again. Whereas BD, like no day is the same. So yeah, I think that's probably the thing that I love as well.
And I'd say it's definitely it's the excitement. It's the I think anybody in BD trying to unearth whether they have that the hunger to be constantly chased, but also are incredibly resilient and don't the knockbacks and the knockbacks that you get, you don't take them personally, you just move on, and having that mental resilience to be able to keep going is super important. And I guess there's lots of people on the call here that I know, but I'm personally I'm quite highly dyslexic and also got ADHD. And that's a massive trait in a lot of business development and sales people, whether they want to tell people or not. I'm very open about it, but it really is. So, you need constant, in a way, constant gratification and, those wins, constantly winning.
And like Chandeep just asked a nice question about how do you deal with the uncertainty and patience needed for a long prospecting to closing cycle, because I know, like, especially now, anyone I'm talking to, sales cycles have just got longer and longer, and there are ups and downs. It is nervy. So I guess, how do you guys deal with some of that uncertainty? And
I think definitely the sales cycle is way longer. I think typically for me in the business I work in, it can be anything from 6 to 18 months, so it is quite long. I think so. Yeah, you do need to be patient, but I think the thing that excites me, and I think is a key part now of a business development role, is actually that nurturing and that staying in touch program, because clients aren't making decisions straight away. I think it's how can you be creative, how can you be engaging, what value can you add whilst you're going through that sales cycle for however long it is, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or so on. So I quite enjoy that. So I don't know, can we invite them to something? Can we talk in the press about something and then send them something? So it's kind of how can we nurture them to make sure that we're staying front of mind, because obviously they're talking to other people too, and obviously we want to win and close the deal. So for me, that's kind of how I handle the uncertainty, because you have got to be patient and wait, but I think it's finding that right balance.
Always doing something right to. We can't just sit back with too wanting to get nurture or get on top. Anything else to add to that? Any guys?
I also echo what Rebecca said. Contact strategy is super key, and it will just help with your patience, because you're not just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. You're constantly thinking about new things to send to the client, or however to engage them throughout that process. So I think that contact strategy is definitely key.
Yeah. For me, it's always about focusing on the next one. Like, I can't get too caught up in, I think some people put maybe too many eggs in one basket, right? And they kind of like, oh God, this has got to land. And if it doesn't, then what's coming down the pipeline, what's next? And for me, it's always about having multiple things in a pipeline at any one time, because then I don't treat one more important than the other to a certain extent. And it means that if I do lose one, I've got something else to point to. And I think that's always important in sales. Otherwise, you can act desperate and you can put too much pressure on yourself in trying to close one deal. And if that doesn't work, you then you've got nowhere to go.
I guess also having different that in any business, whether that be whether this be marketing agencies, or recruitment, let's say, it's having you've got different products to sell, and certain products might have different timing plan, but might be go at different speeds, work at different times, and also have different revenue sizes. But something that's smaller should never be overseen by something that's huge, because the chances of winning it are probably greater when they're smaller, and they acorns can turn into oaks, etc. So that's the key thing, is having a fair bit in your pipeline, so you're never really feeling exposed.
Yeah, knowing what to focus on, right, and qualifying as well and things. So I guess like the BD role, in my lifetime, past 15, 20 years, has completely changed, right? When I started off sort of very much cold calling, you've had an explosion of social media and content and events and everything. And I mean, it just seems to be getting more and more complex, right? But they're not hiring more people into our teams. We're just asked to sort of do more skills, more arms, until we turn into like aliens, right? So I guess your perspective, I guess maybe you Bianca, like, what is the role of a BD person? What does a BD person do these days, and how have you seen that the role sort of transfer?
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite questions when you sent them over, because it's more, what do we not do? Because we do everything now. Yeah, when I started out, a lot of my role was actually quite admin focused. Not that those things aren't important anymore. But yeah, it was a lot of room bookings and managing diaries and that kind of thing, which is still absolutely key now. But I think it's gone way beyond that now. Now we're sort of in the room and being asked to be strategic. We're quite often the second hand to the client lead. And we're not just offering like strategic support, it's also moral and emotional support. We're quite often like the sounding board for the whole team. We're quite often the right-hand person to like the C-suite lead or the exec sponsor that's working on the pitch. Yeah, to me, it's gone way beyond just, are we hitting that deadline? And it's gone on to us managing particular work streams, us feeding in more into, just leaning in more to different work streams, actually writing some of the content as well as looking at like the client's pitch experience. So when they walk into the building, what does it feel like? What does it sort of look like when they walk in? So it's gone beyond the typical job of what we used to do. It's much more than that. So we're definitely becoming aliens.
Yeah, exactly. Ali, what about in terms of job specs and what people are looking for in that regard in terms of BD? Do people?
Well, first and foremost, it's very much. It completely depends on the business, the size, scale, the resources within that business. I guess placing and whether they've had the function before, or let's say you get a lot of people. It might be an independent, and you've got the founders that have been doing it and doing it very well, and then coming in to take that off everybody. It can be plain sailing, and it also can be quite a tussle, because you're sort of fighting against those people, those leaders who have done it all their life. They've got the business to a point that's so successful that they can afford to employ someone to do that. Not giving a fluffy answer, but I've seen so many different job descriptions for the same role. It's you really got to get in and properly identify what is there, what opportunity, what is there, and then you generally have to craft it out of that. One brief can't just fit for everything. It's very, very unique.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, obviously, it's so important. It's your job to do that, but I think sometimes there's maybe a lack of a skill gap or a knowledge gap in terms of what people actually do need. And I guess you could, you work with a client to ascertain that and understand it. But I reckon there's a lot of people who don't use like recruitment agencies and go direct. And then they go, I'm looking for a BD person, when it could be a million things that Bianca just described. And suddenly how they're going to know they're getting the right thing if they don't know what they need?
But also, how do they know that one person is going to be able to be that silver bullet, right?
Yeah.
It's like, really, it's like you always put it down to, the guy outside the tube that's sitting there and he's got 7, 10 different instruments and he's playing them all at once and managing actually to create a decent tune. And you're like, mate, you're an amazingly awesome human being to be able to do that. He's got a flute sticking out of his ear and he's whatever, or whoever it is. But that's how I see it. And that's how you have to go and pick out those briefs and go, look, this person cannot do all of this. It's an impossibility. So how are we actually going to identify who's going to support them, who's going to do this, that, and the other within that organization before you even go there? Because I'll be like, if you think they can do all of that, you're going to waste your money because they're going to fail.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so hard. It's like, but then why hire one of those when actually what you need is an orchestra, and
yeah.
And I think I was going to say, I think just to build on that it's very rare you find somebody that can do everything that you need within business development. Everybody has different skills, different strengths and weaknesses. And I think if you're in a smaller business and you're fortunate enough to have a couple of people, you can probably get the best of both worlds because you can complement the different skills. Obviously, as businesses get bigger, you can have bigger teams. But to find somebody that can strategically think about who do we need to target, what will the proposition be, what will the go-to-market message be, and then somebody that can write the pitch presentation, someone that can go and do the presentation, someone will think about nurturing. Those people are so few and far between, which is why when you get this job spec that has a million things on, you're just never going to find that person.
No.
So I think agencies need to be realistic in what they're actually trying to achieve, particularly I think businesses where maybe they've not had a dedicated sales function, because quite a lot of setting up sales teams is actually getting your back office sorted. So have you got case studies? Have you got collateral? Does your website say the right thing? They're super important before you even go and talk to clients. So I think it depends where like an agency is in its journey of sales.
Definitely. Spot on.
Piece there, isn't it? Because I just find that they don't know what they don't know. And like, that's why so much of our work now with Grey Matters is around, we talk about sales transformation, sales enablement, because you can't get going. They all want to jump in until you sort of fix proposition, foundation, CRM processes, case study content. Like, there's so much work to be done, probably about 3 to 4 months worth of work before any outbound work should even start, right? If we're honest with ourselves. But often it's the pressure of the business owners going, well, I need leads. So they just jump in and they just run an automated email campaign without any of that thought.
Yeah, it's where sort of sales, marketing and operations, where do they start and stop? But actually they shouldn't be starting or stopping anywhere because they're completely overlaying each other. And they have to work together and make sure there's, it can be, you can end up having a bit of a leaky bucket in the process. And you've got to be able to fix those. And it might not just be a salesperson or someone that can do cold calling or someone that wants to go out and network all day long, versus someone who's actually a marketeer.
Yeah, and every business has to play to its strengths. And sometimes I've actually found instances where we've generated lots of leads for businesses, but they're not actually able to handle the amount of leads or the amount of calls. So they think that they kind of, new business can create more problems sometimes that people aren't prepared for, which is something that people don't always think about when they're chasing the money. They sort of go, well, hold on, there's a lot of stages to this. But to your point, Ali, then, so Sarah asked it about any tips on how to bring marketing and sales teams together, because it's one of the reasons why this entire community is called BD Matters, because I feel business development as a term does bring sales and marketing together. And I think that is more important now more than ever. So have any of you guys got examples? It's
mapping the journey. You've got to go heavy on the detail and map the journey, and then really understand who's exactly doing what. For instance, you can be sat there and someone can be doing BD or sales, but who is focusing on the company LinkedIn page, who's actually following it. Are they getting any interactions? What's their journey been like? Who knows, that one of those people could be your next, it could be the biggest client the business ever wins, and but they're not interacting, and someone might not be doing that part of the job, and you know, you're losing potentially huge amounts of opportunity. That's just one small piece. You know, you could go on this and you could talk about it for hours, because it's, you know, it is that journey that you've got to make sure it works.
Yeah, I think the sales and marketing teams just have to build up those stronger and better relationships, because they do work hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So I think just making sure that both teams sort of have those key objectives starting out, like what's the key focus that both sales and marketing are working towards. Ultimately, it's the same goal, but when you bring it down to a smaller level, like what are you actually both sort of looking at? So marketing, it might be like case studies and the website, the social platforms and pages, whereas sales, it's more about those pitch responses and the RFP side of things. But those two things can't exist without each other. So I think just having a better and stronger relationship between the two is definitely key.
I think one of the biggest issues I see on that is, just when there's a different reporting line, like I'll always, when I see a sort of new business and marketing director or sales and marketing director, I always get worried if I see a sales and commercial director and a marketing director who both report separately to maybe a CEO or an MD. And if that CEO and MD doesn't have that sort of, you know, that bandwidth or that ability to think both marketing and sales and bring them together, I feel like that's where you can start to see marketing and PR kind of go off in one tangent, doing their own job, their own KPIs, and sales do something completely different. Sorry, Rebecca.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, no, I totally concur with that. I mean, everywhere I've ever gone throughout my whole career, I've always brought sales and marketing together and led the function, because I think that it has to work holistically together. There's no, you know, quite often I think marketers, that they don't have that client facing experience. They're not in the pitches, they're not doing the sales meetings. So sometimes maybe the messaging might not quite resonate. So having that sales perspective of people that are out there on the front line doing the meetings is invaluable to bring back to marketing. So you can kind of hone the message to make it really, really resonate and really land with people you're talking to. And just kind of like, you know, you said, Adam, about maybe getting too many leads in and you can't cope. I think when you've got sales and marketing working together, you can really focus on what are the types of leads you want and what will be the best activities to drive those leads for you. Because sometimes it's better just to have 2 quality leads rather than 15 leads, because you've got a better chance to convert them. So I think that communication and that learning between both sales and marketing is really important, coupled with, I think, the internal culture. I think kind of often you don't realise working in BD, like the importance of internal culture, because you're kind of reliant on everybody else in the agency to help you win the business. You can bring the leads in, but if you haven't got the team around you to help you, the specialists, the people that will work on the business, you're kind of never going to win anything. So that internal part for me is super important, and getting people excited about kind of new business and how they can play their part. And I think the marketing team can do a really good job on that internal comms as well.
Yeah, which is another hat we have to wear, right? It's like internal comms and internal culture.
Also, Rebecca, you probably see this as well. It's making sure that everybody in the business recognises that they're all as important as each other in sales. You know, you could have someone sat in tech, let's say, who is a front end, back end developer, whatever it is, and you know their focus will definitely not be on sales. It'll be anything but. Be like, oh, that's someone else's job. And it's trying to make them realize that it's like this, you're coming at it from a different perspective and a different angle, and you could have just as much weight as you know anybody else in, you know, whether it be client services, strategy and planning, etc., etc. Everybody needs to be joined up in that. And also I guess the reward is the business wins more business and does well, and you have more job security, and you'll win more awards and you're happier. So, you know, that is trying to get that message across to everyone in the business. Yeah, receptionists too. You know, receptionists would be arguably a great person to be. Well, I used to work at an agency called Dynamo, and our receptionist was awesome. Everybody that came in, you know, she would be spending loads of time with these people, and that experience. You know, she was just as good at developing relationships as anybody else in the business, and that's super important to have that.
Yeah, everybody involved. There's loads of sort of horror stories about people who've cold called agencies to sort of test them out and see how they respond and how long they take to get back to briefs and things like that. So yeah, but that's got to come from the top, right? That's about the vision. So what, like, just in your experiences then, like, you've all seen and worked with some great BD people in your times, I'm sure. What do you think, what does it take to be successful in BD, and what sets the brilliant people apart? Bianca, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, there's lots of things. So one of the first things for me would be resilience. I tell a lot of my mentees that they just have to be resilient within their role, because there's so many different challenges that are going to be unexpected. You'll get left field things that come through from the client at the 11th hour. You're being asked to work late. You're being asked to move certain things, and it's just having that level of resilience and being able to just pivot to different ways of working and different ways of thinking when you weren't expected to. Because there's so many different hurdles that you're going to come up against, but just having that resilience there is definitely one of the key things for me. I'd say one of the second things actually is to just be tenacious and to really have hunger and persistence and drive. A lot of the time you'll have people tell you that, oh, it's not possible, you can't do this in BD, or we can't do it, we don't have enough budget, but there's always a way to get it done. So I think just being persistent, having that tenacity is definitely key.
Loads of hustle.
Yeah, definitely being a hustler. And being an entrepreneur as well, or working for a company, an entrepreneur, but just looking for different solutions to help you solve different challenges that come up.
I definitely had self-belief, massive self-belief, and believe in what you're selling, believe in who you are as a person, and being incredibly confident about your own skill set. Because that, quite often someone's going to decide pretty quickly whether they want to work with you or not. And also being a good human being, that is without a shadow of a doubt. And how do you become that? Well, you probably taught that by your parents, right? So, it comes from way back. Values. There's so many things. There's loads.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with all those. I think honesty, Ali, building on that point, I think you've got to kind of be true to yourself when you're selling. So like, don't try and sell them something you absolutely know you can't deliver or fulfill on. So try and be kind of realistic in what you're doing. And I think also being a good listener. I think as a BD person, you need to listen to what the client wants, what their problems are, what their pain points are, so you can actually go back with a compelling presentation and proposal that's actually going to deliver what they need. And I think sometimes you get some salespeople that are so hungry, so tenacious, they're running off ahead and they're not listening to what the client wants, and then you just end up losing. So totally agree, like being resilient, tenacious, all of that. But I think that listening for me is like a really key part of the mix. And also multitasking. I think we've already spoken about, you need to wear like 10,000 different hats. Having the ability to multitask is absolutely essential in BD, because there's just so many things going on in a really, really fast-paced environment. You can't plan your week. You don't know what's going to happen. So multitasking definitely is important.
Yeah. No, I agree. So I think with some of the tenacity point, the thing I wanted to say was about the impacts I think BD and the pressures are having on mental health. I think it's just worth a sort of side note mention.
Self-care is important.
Yeah. I think it's just like, whereas look, I agree there's pressures in this role, and it's not for the faint-hearted, right? And you do need to be tenacious and resilient. But I think if you're appreciated and respected and supported in that and recognized for the work you put in, it's when you're doing that and it's not recognized. I think the Drum only published an article yesterday, and it's constant. It's in the Positive Pitch Pledge. There's lots of stuff about it in the last couple of years when it's become more prevalent, just talking about the pressures of BD. So I think it's upon all of us to sort of just talk about it with our leadership teams and the people that be, and just realize that it is high pressured. And if you're having to wear multiple hats and all of this stuff, like, if you describe this role to an alien coming in and listening, they'll be like, fuck me, like, this sounds horrific. And if it's not done with support, you need that with it. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of flagged that. But I think
being able to say no as well, Adam, and challenge people internally, I think it's a really important part of that well-being and kind of mental health, because I think naturally BD people are just, you want to say yes, you want to do everything because that's just your natural trait and your natural thing that you want to do. But actually, the best people are the ones that can say no. The targets you're setting, they're not realistic. I'm going to explain why on the experience I've got. And also, no, we can't do any more pictures, or no, we can't, I don't know, update the website as quickly as you want for these reasons. So I think just having open and frank conversations is really important internally as well, for your own sanity and your own well-being.
Yeah.
One other thing is really understanding where your skill set is, what you're world class at, and everybody's got weaknesses, right? Really understanding what those are, identifying them, and making sure you're getting support for those things is really, really, really important. Because naturally you're not going to do the things that you're weaker at than the things that you're stronger at. I've run a business for 15, 16 years, and I have to have people around me to support me because there are certain things that I'm just absolutely rubbish at. But it's recognizing that, it's being true to yourself about that. People won't knock you. It's actually really good to go and say, look, these are the things that I'm not great at, but you're not going to get anybody else as good as me at this, this, and this. People respect that.
Yeah, I mean, these are sort of tough conversations, I think, for people to have sometimes. And I agree with everything you both are saying, but saying no to a CEO when he wants everything done yesterday and he wants to say yes to everything, we know that's not an easy conversation. And I think BD people can often be exposed to very senior people at very early stages of their career, more so than any other team. So you can get a new business exec join a big agency. They've got 2 years into their career and they're sitting in a room with a CEO, right? That's the reality, right? And I know there's people on the call that are I've been in that situation. And it's good when we've got, we've all got that experience, but I just think there are junior people and we need to sort of help educate the senior leaders to understand this role more and the pressures on it, and also encourage and help those junior people have those conversations and find and explain their skills and explain that they're not good at running events, but they're brilliant at lead generation or whatever it is.
But I also think it's really good and important to have a strong people manager for some of those junior people, because those junior people can't be expected to tell that C-suite person, I can't do this, or I'm not able to do this. Their line managers should be in the room to sort of have that buffer there between them and those senior people. Because I think just making sure that we've got certain boundaries in place for ourselves on our day-to-day jobs is super important. But a lot of the time, whether you're junior or senior, sometimes those people aren't there to vocalize that for you on your behalf. So I think just making sure that you've got a good relationship, obviously, with your manager, and you're communicating when there's certain things that you can't handle, just to make sure that you do have that balance and those boundaries there is really key for me anyway.
Yeah, I think that, and there could be some people in much smaller businesses who don't have people managers and things like that. So I think maybe it's about identifying other people in the company who could act for you and someone you could potentially go to. But so I wanted to talk about the skills you mentioned, right? And this might be more for you to start with, Ali, is that we talked about I don't know, I can't remember them all, but tenacity and resilience and being a good person and honesty. These are all really hard skills to identify in an interview, right?
Very, very hard.
You are talking about real soft skills. And I think that I've struggled with this myself, when I've gone to market and trying to find good people, BD people, give us some advice of how we can try and help identify.
So number one, it's obviously getting people to talk openly, and at the same point interrogate the skills, understanding what their part is within that. That's really important, and getting them to be honest about that. I also feel it's trying to identify the sort of let's say identify the numbers or the commercials, and if someone that is good and knows what they're doing and is a big part of that will be all over the numbers. They'll know it inside out, upside down. As soon as you start hearing any sort of fluffy responses or whatever else, that's you want to create yourself some opportunities to have those alerts where you then can revisit it, but asking people to actually do it. And then also, you know, we spend a lot of time finding out, you know, arguably if what's on a CV is correct, right? You have to, you know, or when you're working with a creative, let's say, which is, I know we're not talking about creative, but you've got to try and work out whether they've actually done that work, whether they've been part of it, etc., etc. And it is about interrogation and not being embarrassed to do that, and being really open and honest with people about why you need to know this.
Yeah, I think getting people to open up is probably one skill set, right? Which is, you know, tough in itself. And I think the double-sided trick to this is that they're salespeople, BD people. They're good at selling. They're good at selling themselves, right? And they're probably good communicators. And I think, I think as a person, personally, I can be too trusting, and I'm too willing to accept, like, or think like the best of somebody. And so I'll sometimes sort of, you know, take on somebody, and then you find out that maybe that's not the reality. I think
there's some smaller things, isn't there? Like, I think track record. I think people that can demonstrate their track record in sales, I think it's like a really key thing. So like, what have you actually won, or what have you actually contributed to? What impact did it have on the agency you're working at? But one of the things I always look for also with BD people is how long they've stayed at a company for. Because typically, if you're a salesperson and you're not very good, they don't keep you for very long. So like, I always look at the tenure, the length of tenure of how long people stay somewhere, because I think that's also a good indication. I think as you hire more senior people, I think reputation is really important as well. It's quite a small industry that we work in. Most people know somebody that knows somebody. So I think that reputation is important as well for me. But yeah, you're right. I mean, salespeople are good at selling, so they're good at selling themselves. So you've got to dig a bit deeper, I think, and that track record is the thing for me where I can identify whether or not I think they can do the job.
What you said about people, you know, how can I put it? Not being rude about anybody in the market, because, you know, certain things happen to certain people at certain times of their career that there's nothing that they can do about it. It's, you know, look at COVID. Christ, you know, the one thing about COVID was a lot of business development salespeople were very secure because they were in the you know, in the inner onion of people that they just can't afford to lose. But it is definitely working in a business development sales environment. If someone is jumping around, because, you know, your job generally gets easier the longer you are in an organization, because you become, you know, it's by osmosis, isn't it? You become a bigger part of that business. You know how it operates. You know, you get all the nuances. You know everybody inside out. You know, you can second guess people quite often because you know how they are and how they operate. So that Rebecca's very, very right there in terms of how long someone's been in a job.
So I know, obviously, there's, just to point out, there's a big difference between BD in a big business versus a small business, right? And I've noticed this in my whole career. It's literally like a different role and walking into the different world, right? If you are a scrappy 5-10-man agency or business that's trying to get off the ground versus, you know, a Publicis, right? So talk to me a little bit about the different, you know, I don't know if you've experienced it as sales in your roles and if you've flitted between the two, but what's the difference between a BD person or the skills they need at an agency like a Publicis compared to maybe a smaller business?
I think, to be honest, I really do think that you're the same BD person, but because there's so many hats that you have, there's just different hats that you'll pull out for a small one versus a large one. So I think the basis of what you do in BD is going to be the same. Your values will be the same. You're just sort of pulling out different sides of you. So I think with like small, for instance, because I've worked at a small agency, there's no resources. So you have to lean in way more. You're doing a lot more of roles that are way beyond BD, but there's also beauty in that because there's so much that you learn very, very quickly. And it's something that I always encourage people, like when they're coming into their career, if they can, sort of start small, because you're hands-on and everything, you learn all the brilliant basics, so that when you do go to that larger company, you can sort of take that with you and then some, but also just have real context to what some of those people are doing on a day-to-day. But yeah, I think for small, it's more you leaning in a lot more hands-on. But when you're in that sort of large company, like where I am now, Publicis, it's a lot more of the management and orchestration, and you're still involved, but you're directing teams a lot more than you would have in a smaller company because you just didn't have that resource there. So yeah, I think as the same person, you're just pulling out different elements and sides of you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that, Bianca. I've worked in small and large agencies. I think in a smaller agency, it's more entrepreneurial, less rigor around processes and how you do things. So actually, you have more autonomy when it comes to BD, and you're a bit more in control of that. But you've got to work a lot harder because you tend to have a much lower brand recognition in the marketplace. People haven't heard of you, so it's tougher. Whereas working at a larger business, like maybe a Publicis or wherever, people have heard of you. So actually you'll get a lot of inbound inquiries, or because you're part of a network, oh, they do the media, so we're going to talk to you about digital. There's a lot of referrals across the organisation and network internally. So there's pros and cons to both. I don't think any is ideal, but yeah, I think it's the same sort of person. You're just working within a different landscape.
Yeah, I guess you all know the BD 100, which we sponsor, and quite often, Bianca, we've sat in being judges, and we've got all the people's applications, scripts. They go to a lot of effort in, and then you're sitting there and trying to gauge on how can we actually qualify these two, because one's from a small agency and one's from an absolute behemoth, and you're like, and they're up there looking for they want to be the best business developer, and it's like, it's really difficult to clarify that because of the nature of what they're doing.
Yeah, I did that judging, and I found that same challenge, like the context of the challenge of
it's very difficult.
Yeah, really hard. And it's I guess being in a small business, it is that cut hustle. It's like, how do we get into these people? Well, do you know what? You go and find out where they travel on the train and go and hopefully sit next to them and start a conversation, and that's stupid stuff like that. Where in a large business, it'd be like, well, we don't operate like that. We don't need to operate like that because we got far more. Our systems and our processes are way more advanced. But you can never stop that type of mentality of living in their shoes and making that extra effort and saying, right, I am going to go and hunt them down and find out where they are, and then give them a reason to open a conversation, and you never know where it goes, right?
I always find it interesting, just the two sides, what they miss. So I've gone into sort of massive global agencies and looked at their business and they don't even have a CRM system in place. They're not even using it, right? And I would say, like, what would happen if this agency used the CRM system effectively and thought more entrepreneurially like a small agency would? And these big agencies, yes, they get a lot, but there'll always be the small, quicker, agile agencies that are nipping at their heels and taking things. Yeah. And that's because they want it more. They're putting their A team on every time, right? Which is their probably their senior leadership team. And they're just sort of more on top of that, nurturing and keep in touch. And big agencies can get a bit slow, can get a bit lazy and complacent, I find, in certain times. And I think like you said, Bianca, like you start with a small agency, take that learning to a big agency. It's so important, because I did the same. Yeah. And I was able to go to a big agency and be like, you are not thinking entrepreneurially. You are just, you've got your relationships with your intermediaries, and you're happy doing a bit of PR with campaign, and you're missing, especially now when you've got all these like tech startups and businesses that are falling under the radar of the big advertisers, but still have massive budgets. I think that's why a lot of big agencies have missed out on some of those opportunities, because they're not entrepreneurial enough. They're not snappy and looking at that as a
And I think quite a few of the bigger agencies have started to realize that. So a lot of their propositions now talk about being scrappy, and we have the power and scale of this, but we're agile enough to do this, because they do realize that is sort of missing, and they do need to still behave in that sort of smaller agency, scrappy way. But yeah, I think they're definitely catching on to that, if not already.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, like, obviously we talked a bit about identifying BD skills and sort of the hiring bit about the hiring process, but I'm interested in sort of what a BD person needs in place in order for them to be successful, because often I've walked into roles and it's been a shit show. And I'm like, they're like, off you go. And I'm like, okay. So like, from your experience, what are the things that you've put in place, or I don't know, Ali, when you're recruiting for a role and you're thinking what's in place, what do they need to be successful? What would really help them?
Oh, that's quite a long list.
Top three.
What do they need to be successful? I believe that they an up-to-date, well crafted LinkedIn profile is definitely something that, and it's quite funny. I get people, I even get businesses. I'm talking to someone, I was talking to someone today, and I was trying to interrogate their business, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're not on LinkedIn." I was like, "What? How can you not be on LinkedIn? That's just bonkers." But there are people out there that aren't. So yeah, I'd say LinkedIn, a really strong CRM system, and then more softer sides is allowing BD people to work how they want to work, and in having a bit of flexibility. Don't try and sort of corral them or put too much of a fence around them, so they can't be creative and they can't be sort of some people work well in the morning, some people work well in the evenings. People need that need to work around how they are and how they work best. I hope that's a decent start.
Giving them autonomy. I think one of the biggest things for me is making sure that we have an agency proposition that is either tried and tested, but it's ready to go. Because BD people, we can sell a lot of stuff, but a lot of the time you might find that the proposition isn't ready to go, or we don't have the right collateral in place in terms of case studies haven't been written up. And we can help with all of that type of stuff. But I think just making sure that the agency is quite strong and firm in their proposition, and we've got the assets needed to go out to market to sell, is quite important. That's one of the harder things. But I think probably some of the softer things is just giving them the opportunities and exposure to shine. So if you are like a line manager of someone that's, say, they're junior, giving them the opportunities and the space to be in those rooms with maybe sometimes senior people, to have the opportunity to present certain things, or just sort of show up in the best way that they can, but creating that space and environment for them to be able to shine. Because quite often, sometimes they can just be, you'll be off to a rehearsal meeting and that junior person might just be left at their desk, still doing the work, but no one knows who they are. So I think just giving them the opportunities to just be in front of certain people is another softy thing that can be done.
And I know I mentioned about internal culture earlier, but I think when you hire a BD person to come in, whatever level they are, I think that internal culture is really important, that it's set out like who they are, what their role is, what they're here to do, to try and kind of instill that kind of sales mindset. Everyone's in sales, but I think the value they're going to bring to the agency and why it's going to be good for you if we win more business and things like that. I think quite often people get bought in, but then maybe like the CEO or whoever, they've not set that person up for success because they've not really laid out what they're there to do. So I think that's quite important. And then I just think looking at it from the other side, I think if you're going for an interview somewhere, I think it's really important as a BD person, you actually ask challenging questions, and you actually ask, well, what is the infrastructure? What support will I have? What is in place? What isn't in place? So you're going in with your eyes open, and you know the task you're going to have ahead of you. Because quite often, you read on an agency website, oh, they've got this client and then this many people, and then you get there, you're like, oh, okay, they're not. So I think as a BD person, you should be challenging when you're being interviewed, and you should be asking questions of them in terms of what their real expectations are, and if they're ready to support you and invest in BD as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's so true, Rebecca. And the truth element about what business owners say they have, and then they haven't. I've experienced the odd call before. I get a phone call on day 3 going, oh shit, what have you done to me? I'm like, oh no. So that and you shouldn't ever be scared to interrogate anyone about anything. You really shouldn't. and, you know, test their integrity, you know, talk to other people, find out clients that they've worked with before, and actually and speak to them and say, what's your experience been like?
You know, especially in BD, right? Because ultimately, if they're bringing in a BD person, there's potentially a problem in their sales pipeline, right? So although you want the role and it's all exciting, right? They're trying to fix something. Now, you know, you need to scratch a bit deeper, and it just you coming in the role, you know, and I guess it's hard to see this, but replacing the person and putting the person in place might not be the solution. Right? There might be a bigger problem that sits behind that. And I think it's the job of you as a BD person to identify the real problem to BD, right? You kind of got to fix the problem. And it's not just a case of you just do this and carry on doing the same thing. Your job is to fix, right? And ultimately, some people think they're like, oh, they're classic, oh, we just need more leads, right? But they aren't actually wrestling with the real problem as to why they're not generating the leads, which could be far deeper into proposition work or people in the room or you know, the way they're articulating their message or the clients they're going after. There could be real deep problems. And our job as BD people is to identify those problems and make them see and convince them that we can solve them. Not just to do what we're told and just go and call 50 more people or whatever they think it is, because that's going to lead them in the same problem the last person was in. So I just, you know, 5 minutes to go or so, just thinking about like nurturing BD talent, like in terms of your experience, like what's been the toughest times, I'd say, in your careers and other BD people might have in their careers, right, going through this role, and then sort of how you got through that? Because I'm gonna, you know, ultimately we're all going to have hard times, we're going to hit challenges in our jobs. So does anyone want to sort of talk about typical barriers that the BD people face, or their own barriers that you faced, if it's more personal, and what you did to kind of overcome that?
I wonder if it's a more general point and not even just specific to BD people, but I think one of the challenges that I've faced has been actually hiring junior people. So somebody whose first or second job it is. I think since we've moved to this more, obviously during COVID, we were all remote, but since we've been in this hybrid world, it's very difficult to support people who are just starting out in their career, because you can't just give somebody a laptop, plonk them at home. They're not going to learn anything. So for me, I don't know the answer to this, but that's really difficult, I think. And particularly, I think, you know, as BD people, you're naturally inquisitive and you want to hear what's going on. You want to be in the buzz of it. So that office environment, you just hear and learn so much when you're first starting out. So I think as an industry, we need to think about how we're going to develop the next phase of people coming in, because hybrid working or pure remote working for those sorts of people is quite challenging, I think, for the environment that we operate in. So I'm not sure we're accelerating their learning as quickly as we could be if we were all in the office.
It's absolutely spot on. I'd arguably say that if you're fully remote, and this can go either way, but I'd probably advise not to hire, you know, grads, because it's unfair to them. In the end of the day, it's their career, and it's like, it's just not fair. You know, I believe grads need to be going in and having presence and being there, and you know, you learn everything from here, listening to other people.
Yeah, I think working from home 100% of the time is very isolating, and just being in the office whenever you're in an agency, you learn through osmosis just from people talking around you. There's so much that you pick up. But yeah, I think one of the other barriers I'd say is work-life balance, not even just within BD, but in agency life. It's always do I work late today, or this deadline's due, but actually I've got this thing to do outside of work. So I think it's finding that balance between the two, because a lot of it is outside of your control. But I'd say one of the, well, not solution, because it's not something to just be easily fixed, but just communication with whoever your line manager is or whoever you report to, and just making them aware of, if you do have something that's important that needs to be dealt with at this time, there's a reason that you can't deliver X, for instance. But yeah, that's one of the other barriers, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, that's all really important stuff to BD Matters. And one of the reasons I set this up was to sort of, you know, encourage people at junior level to take on BD as a career path, you know. And if you ask 90 99% of the BD people, you know, how they got into this. They all fell into it, right? It was never planned or never by design. And I think that's a real shame, because we've all talked about how incredible a career BD is and the diversity and the excitement that it brings. And so it'd be good, you know, the big mission of BD Matters is to get it taught, you know.
That goes to school, right? You know,
Yeah.
my daughter's just done her A-levels, and she left school, and she's like, I don't know how to get a job. Like, God.
And I had to sell.
You're lucky you've got a father that knows how to get you a job. But it absolutely surprises me. The whole curriculum of schools is so wrong. You know, it just doesn't prepare you for the business world at all. And that needs to be a massive change across the whole world, I think, not just the UK.
Yeah, it's a big problem, and sales is still not seen as a chartered profession, you know, by any means. There's not really accreditations and things. There's lots of people out there, training courses and things you can go on, but you know, there's no benchmarking, and it makes it very tricky to know what is a good BD person. How do I improve my skills? Where do I go to learn? So yeah,
I think that's why platforms like the BD 100 are so key, and why it's doing so well, because it's like finally we have some form of platform or like an accolade that we can actually get for our role. But it definitely needs to be championed more also within the agency, because there's so many people that I speak to, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in BD. They have no idea what BD is or what we do on a day-to-day basis. So I think there's a lot of internal comms and marketing that needs to go on around BD and what we do and how important it is.
Yeah, massively. You know,
I think on a positive though, I think you end up having such a wide range of skills that you learn throughout your career. Actually, you can go anywhere with it, and they're actually really transferable skills. And I think people often underestimate that. So, you know, you don't necessarily need to stay in that profession forever. You can go and do other things, because what you learn is invaluable and can be transferred to most other roles and businesses anywhere.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, look, I think on that note, I want to thank you all for raising the awareness of BD and being a part of it. Really enjoyed it. So our next interview is on the 1st of November. So we're going to be talking about harnessing the right MarTech and sales technology for your new business program. We're talking to Force 24, Lido, and a few others. And our next meetup, which is for paying members, is on the 18th of October, led by Claire Hutchings, who's one of our mentors. And I'm actually running the next workshop, which I've never done before, run a workshop for BD Matters, but I'm doing it for myself, which is on the 19th of October. And if you're a non-paying member, you can also buy a ticket for that sort of individually if you wanted to come along. And if you want to find out any more about BD Matters, I've dropped a note in the chat. The creds are at the bottom. Love to see more of your faces more regularly and have you signed up. But yeah, thank you, Ali. Thanks, Bianca. Thank you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.